Hello and welcome, Exiles, to the Day 2 update to the Relic of the Pact, Gladiator. And I say Relic of the Pact because we swapped over from Bleed Slams to this bad boy right over here. And I gotta say, for a Day 2 for me, this was a banger. We actually farmed enough currency to buy a mirror last night, and we were roughly around the just over 1 day slash played. I'm gonna show you what it looks like in terms of what we were farming, which was Ubers. Ubers on Day 2. So many of the drops are valuable and worth a lot, and I'm going to go ahead and showcase this Cortex while I try to describe what's going on with the build, because I don't have a lot of time this morning. The kids are still asleep, and I'm going to go ahead and have to go pretty soon here, getting them ready. So anyways, this is the skill called Relic of the Pact. This blood explosion you see is from the, technically it's called Blood Sacrament. It's from the wand called Relic of the Pact, and I'm going to go ahead and try to describe what's happening here. So this skill called Blood Sacrament from Relic of the Pact, it has like a base, I don't know, 1% life reservation per tick of the cast you do, and it's a channeling skill, and normally you channel it up and then explode. With the setup we have here, specifically 92% reduced reservation efficiency, there's 105 reduce or 107 reduced with these two items, but then I have a treachery on, which gives 15% increased reservation efficiency, 92% reduced reservation efficiency, plus these supports with their multipliers means every time I do a 1 tick of this cast, I reserve about 91% of my life. And that is actually ideal, because the way this skill works is it is a more damage multiplier based on like every 10 life you reserve or something like that. So if you have a high life pool and you reserve a lot in 1 tick, you do a big damage amount. I'm going to showcase without the damage, without the reservation stuff after this fight, just to give you a look of what it looks like in terms of the difference it makes to have the 1 tick reservation versus not the 1 tick reservation. And you'll see how much difference it makes. Basically, it just means you can immediately cast it versus channeling up and going boom. Now, that has to do with Blood Sacrament. That's kind of the basics for the Blood Sacrament. As for other mechanics we have going on this build that might be a little bit more not familiar, as like, for example, you might see my HP bar is constantly at like 1. It's very, very low. You might think, Lance, you're about to die. How have you not died? That has to do with the combination of a few things. Dissolution of the flesh is the main thing, and then outside of that, we're also running a setup with block and with a new mechanic called Blood Barrier from the Val Ascendancy. That's that top left corner. You'll see there's a number of about 5,000, 4,800 on screen. That is actually a barrier in front of my HP pool that the enemies have to hit through before they hit my life. And then we also have Lucky Block from Gladiator, one of my favorite carry ascendancies where you can pair this. Okay, now this is a good example of something. The one weakness of the character right now is dots, specifically if you're casting on top of a dot. So what just happened there is I walked onto this dot. I wasn't paying attention. I was just trying to describe what's going on, and I started casting. This is the one way we've died, and basically the only way we've died while doing these Ubers. And essentially what happens is when you reserve that 90 whatever percent, you have a vulnerability period, which is pretty much only susceptible to dots because Blood Barrier protects against hits, and the hits have to hit you on like the exact like server tick. I'm gonna like respawn because apparently these are like gonna keep spawning dots while I'm out here. But anyways, what happened there is I casted my 90% reservation, and I had already been standing on the dot, so that reserved maybe 8% of my life. Then I reserved 91%, and it took me all the way down to 1 HP. And what happens is the dot will tick before the unreservation of the skill. So it's one of the few scenarios where this build is susceptible to a one-shot, which is, it's not actually a one-shot, it's a server dot tick or whatever you want to call it, but it's one of the only ways for us to be a day draw this build, and I wasn't paying attention, and they spawned a dot underneath me, and I cast during it. Now, because I stayed on the ground for so long, they had time to spawn some extra dots, which is not ideal, so let's try to hopefully clear this up without failing this, because this guy has an immense amount of dots around him. But anyways, that is the one weakness of the build. I'm glad I got to showcase it, because that's just like, for the most part, that's pretty much the only way you die on this character. But I want to assure you that even though that is something that can happen, it is not a very common occurrence. Ooh, gain on hit on a Nebulus's. Do I get a high roll? And I got a pretty high roll. That's actually really sick. Anyways, besides the point. So yeah, that's the one weakness of the build. For the reasons as to why the hits are not very dangerous for the build, that has to do with the combination of Blood Barrier, Block, and Dissolution all kind of working very synergistically. So let's go ahead and showcase this real quick. So Blood Barrier, just so you know, that's from this Ascendancy right here. At the last line, you'll see you have Sacrifice of Blood if you have at least 8 corrupted items. Then below that, it tells you what Sacrifice of Blood is. That's that third box of text. And it basically says, while you are on full life, your regen will apply to both your life and to Blood Barrier, with the downside of you get half regeneration. So what ends up happening is, whatever my regen is, like 1,000 regen per second, that is actually applying to this while also applying to my life regen at the same time. This is very useful because normally Dissolution, the thing we're using in combination with this, normally what happens is if you take chip damage, you just get your life reserved a little bit, then a little bit more, then a little bit more, then a little bit more, and eventually you die. With this Blood Barrier, it gives you a source of basically constant recovery, and it's against hits, so it takes out one of the main weaknesses of playing a Dissolution build. So normally, like, so I'm not really getting hit, but you'll see if one of these guys hits me. Yeah, you'll see the Blood Barrier get moved. And now I'm going to showcase, if I take off Block, you see the Blood Barrier is still doing a lot here. My life isn't getting reserved because they're still trying to fight through the Blood Barrier. Now, if I take off one corrupted item like this, you'll notice Blood Barrier goes away, and all of a sudden I'm taking chip damage and my life is getting reserved. So that's the importance of Blood Barrier, is it gives you this constant regenning layer that you normally couldn't get access to with Dissolution. And then on top of that, the other important thing Blood Barrier does is when enemies are trying to chip through Blood Barrier, they aren't reserving your life, so that 2-second window where your life needs to get unreserved has a chance to pop. So for example, you saw my life was getting reserved, right? It was getting reserved, it's getting reserved, and then I put on Blood Barrier, and I'm still taking damage, I'm still getting hit, but you'll see that 2 seconds goes by, and boom, the unreserved happens. So there's this very nice pairing where the Blood Barrier makes it easier to hit that 2-second window for your reservation to pop, and it's not really that long of a window. And then when you combine it with Block, all of a sudden 90% of the damage isn't even hitting you, and that with the Blood Barrier is this really nice layer on top of Dissolution, and it's pretty much taking away the majority of the downsides of Dissolution, which is that chip damage weakness, and then you end up with a huge upside of you just get 30% more life, which is very important for a build like this, because Blood Sacrament, this skill, you'll see it says 40% more damage with, or 80% more damage with hits per 10 life reserved. Every bit of life you're getting makes it way more efficient, right? That's a huge damage multiplier. It's also a damage multiplier with Wrathmith, which gives you crit chance and spell damage, and it just synergizes perfectly. Now, let's talk a bit about the other damage layer we have, which is Impale. These gloves basically say, if you crit, you will impale, and I'll make that impale 1.5 times as valuable. These gloves with this Fizz build basically give you 2x damage. I find them as a very nice pair to the build, and it synergizes quite well. So yeah, that's the synergy here. The other synergy is we are on low life. Now you might think you're not on low life, you're at 16k life. Well, every time we cast this skill, when we cast it, we are on low life. We're constantly on low life. Now, one thing that's to note about being on low life, you might be asking, how is your Blood Barrier going to recover if you are on low life? Well, we're actually also on full life. Coward's Chains, the reason we're using this belt is for the pairing with Blood Barrier, which requires the full life condition. Note, it does not make you not on low life. You're still on low life. It just also tells the game to tick the condition that you're on full life. So you're technically both on full life and on low life simultaneously. And the beauty of low life is not only does it give you 30% more damage, but with the Relic of the Pact, you also get lucky crit lucky crit chance. So even though our crit chance isn't too great, like if I go to this, we're at 45. With Diamond, we're at 52. With Power Charges, maybe we're around 57. With Assassin's Mark, we're at, like, let's say 70. Even though our crit chance isn't perfect, that lucky crit rolls it twice, and we're actually more like effectively like 90-something crit. And as we scale more life, that crit chance will go up and become more effective. So that's some of the mechanics on the Blood Barrier, Dissolution, the Glad. That's the synergy there. As for the reservation amount and constantly be on low life, this is a Dissolution mechanic where the way enemies deal damage to you is they reserve life. It's no longer about what your red life bar, it's about what your life reserved is. So even though we're constantly on low life, our max hit is very, very high. Our only real danger is enemy puts down a dot, we stand on that dot, and we cast. Now, speaking of dots, I say it's only ground dots. That's because we have solved all ailments possible. One thing I have to stress is the most important thing to do with the Dissolution build is you need to solve for poison, you need to solve for bleed, and you need to solve for ignite. We get poison immune through boots via the Essence of Delirium, and then we get bleed immune through bleed avoid implicit here and bleed avoid tattoos. I have about 7 bleed avoid tattoos on my tree. Later on in the character, when I make more stronger boots, this was just kind of a budget pair to get me started. I can get most of my shock avoid, most of my bleed avoid on the boots. Like I can have crafted 60 bleed avoid, for example. Another upside is later on in the character, we can also get access to having the abyssal socket in here in the boots, because you can do a essence or a hollow fossil plus a glyphic fossil for corrupt essence, and then if you use shuddering, which disables mana mods, and you use corroded, which disables elemental mods, the only glyphic mod, corrupted essence mod it can hit at that point, I believe, is cannot poison. So you can force on cannot poison with an abyssal socket. So that's kind of a later stage item on the character. Another thing I want to note here is I mentioned it briefly. Reservation efficiency, Will of Zoth. The only reason we're using this ring is to get specifically that 92% reduced reservation efficiency for the 1 tick. I mentioned earlier, this is a channeling skill. If you don't have this reservation efficiency, look at the difference. Okay, see how long that takes? We went from a 1 tick boom to all of a sudden I have to channel for 1 second straight. Not to mention this ring here, Essence Worm. This is also a big proponent of this, of getting reduced reservation efficiency. So you can see the difference, right? We went from 1 tick boom to you have to channel cast. So that's the importance of the reduced reservation efficiency. That's why we're doing that on the character. Late game, you can get a reflected rare ring with like life and crit multi, much stronger. Early game, this is just your budget option. There's also on our character 15% reduce or increase reservation efficiency. This is just to counterbalance to get to 92% reduced. You want specifically 92. If you want to play a bit more on the safe side, you can go for 91% reduced reservation efficiency, which would give you an 80% reservation 1 tick, and you'd be a little bit safer against that dot thing. But ultimately, the dot thing is just pay attention to if you're standing on a dot. Cortex is one of the really annoying ones that can just teleport the dot under you, and it's a really high DPS dot, so it happens really fast. But for the most part, most dots in the game, they're already pre-placed, and they don't do as much damage as the Cortex dot does. So that's what's going on there. For context, I did Ubers basically the entirety of yesterday. That's how we made all of our currency. And we died doing that 47 times after being at like 5 deaths to start with. So 42 deaths. And I think I did maybe 15 to 20 feared rotations, which would put you at around 60 to 80 Ubers. We died like a half time per every Uber we did, with Maven witnessing those Ubers and doing feared as well afterwards. And to put this in perspective, Maven is basically, I would say, the ultimate kryptonite to this build, because Maven, a lot of the stuff Maven does is puts down ground degens. Maven can add this random weird spatial decay dot to enemies, which is basically an ailment that isn't an ailment, where they could apply it to you and you have 8 seconds of no recovery. Like, there's some awkward things like that. And I feel like we fared pretty well given the gear and everything. I'm very happy with this, how this character is done. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the future plans. So I want to swap to Val BV, which requires the Val Sacrifice support, which is confirmed to be from Uber at Ziri. I'm going to wait for that to go down in price a bit. I think today what we're going to do is we're going to make some min-maxy upgrades for this character, and then we'll do one more update on the Relic of the Pact for the people that want to do like a more min-max setup. And then the following day, we're going to swap over to Val BV. That's the rough plan for the character. Hopefully, I've gone over the mechanics decently. Keep in mind, this is just your early setup with getting it swapped over. Late game, we do want to go to an apostate setup with more of like ES based gear and stuff, and that's where we can push the ES number a bit more. And one other thing I want to mention is don't necessarily copy this 4-point jewel socket. The only reason I'm doing this is because I haven't made better boots that fix my shock avoid, which means I can't give up these abyssal jewels yet. And because I can't give up these abyssal jewels, that results in me needing a 4-point jewel socket to add in this Watcher's Eye. Basically, I doubled the cost of my build by buying an Impale double damage Pride jewel, but it's worth it for the 4 points because of how powerful this jewel is. Ideally, you don't want to be spending a 4-point jewel socket. I would never really recommend this. This is only in the case where I'm kind of hamstrung or whatever you want to call it by the fact that I need these avoid shock jewels for my ailment immunity with Storm Shroud. And later on, when I'm gonna remake some boots with better shock avoid, I should get my jewel socket back, and we'll try to spiff up this tree a little bit because there's some inefficiencies going on. Now, one thing I want to note about the tree real quick is you'll notice I'm trying a bit of a different pathing here. Originally, in the video where I said this is the Relic Pact setup I'm going to go for, I had a pathing that goes down, around, and over. I think this setup is maybe slightly better because it gives access to this crit multi-cluster, so I think it's slightly better damage-wise, while being maybe slightly lower life-wise, I think is roughly the trade-off. I like this setup, but both work. Anyways, that's the update to the Relic of the Pact setup. Hopefully you guys are having a good league start. The next update will probably be a bit more min-maxed into an apostate setup with Relic of the Pact, trying to showcase, hey, there's some really good upgrades you can do on this character. And yeah, that's the rough plans. As for Relic of the Pact, one thing I want to mention as well, Relic of the Pact is kind of the elephant in the room right now because it's a fairly rare drop. And it comes from Ultimatum. And people are just starting to get their characters online for their Cast and Sun builds. So Relic of the Pact yesterday, it didn't exist on trade. It was like every time it came up, it was listed for 20D and it was gone like instantly. And that was yesterday. You already can see there's multiple up for 12, 11, 13D. I think this will continue to get saturated. So if you're just farming up your character, I wouldn't necessarily stress rushing to buy this. It is completely the mandatory piece for the build, but do keep in mind that it's going to get much more saturated in the market and much more affordable. It's just initially when there's not that many players in maps, not that many people running high-end Ultimatum, it comes from the random waves while doing Ultimatum. So it's really tied to how many players are running Ultimatum. And I think that'll start to saturate more as the league goes on, or at least it normally does. So anyways, yeah, that's the rundown of the character. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this update to the Relic of the Pact Gladiator. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one, Exiles.